Sirens cut through the dawn haze as screens flicker like distressed heartbeat monitors, and Elena feels the tremor in the floor before she realizes it's her own foot tapping. Markets shouldn't move this violently before sunrise, yet the red cascading across her monitors suggests someone just yanked the world's financial wiring loose. She leans closer, breath fogging the glass, wondering who benefits from a trillion-dollar shiver. Behind her, Vel's unread message flashes like a warning light, hinting at a force she once trusted but no longer understands. Every chart twists like a hidden hand is bending it. Every alert screams in the same rhythm, as if coordinated by a mind she can't see. And as the power grid hums, then stutters, the feed cuts to black, leaving a single line pulsing at the center. Find the one pulling the strings before they cut yours. The blackout lingers longer than any routine surge, swallowing the room in a silence thick enough to feel staged, and Elena senses that nothing about this failure is accidental. Markets don't blink out. They're choked. Her pulse rises as fragments of earlier data replay in her mind, each clue pointing toward a pattern built with deliberate precision. Vale steps closer, his presence steady but unreadable, and she wonders whether he's trying to protect her or keep her from seeing too much. The air hums with that eerie half-power vibration buildings make when systems try to reboot. But someone else is holding the switch. She traces the last number she saw, wondering who has the reach to dim the world like this, and why they'd choose this moment to send a message cloaked in darkness. A faint buzz crawls through the wires before light sputters back in jagged rhythm, revealing only partial data restored, just enough to show the bleeding edge of a market collapse that should exist. Elena scrolls through incomplete records, each missing piece feeling like a deliberate cut, a surgeon's removal of anything that would expose the hand behind this move. Vale mutters something about outside interference, but his tone suggests he recognizes the signature. She studies his reaction as closely as the data itself, knowing that sometimes faces reveal what files conceal. The world hasn't fallen yet, but the first domino has clearly been tipped, and whoever pushed it is still watching the effects ripple. The partial reboot unlocks an audio log, distorted, fragmented, but carrying a voice Elena recognizes from deep in her past. She turns up the volume, and though half the words are lost in static, the cadence is unmistakable. Someone once close to her issuing a warning long before today. She plays it again, this time noticing the strain beneath the message, as if the speaker had known their time was almost up. Vale steps nearer, asking what she hears, but she hesitates, unsure whether revealing the connection will tether her to a truth she isn't ready to face. The world outside may be shaking, but the quake inside her feels stronger. As the audio fades into the static of unresolved warnings, Elena steadies her breath and realizes she can no longer treat this like an isolated anomaly. It's the opening move of a larger game she didn't know she was still part of. Vale watches her too closely now, as if waiting for a confession she hasn't offered. The screens struggle to revive, casting fractured light across the room like broken signals of a world losing balance. She grips the edge of the desk, grounding herself, while a single thought gathers weight. Someone buried deep in the global system has begun pulling strings only visible to those who once stood close enough to feel the tension. And she feels it again now, tightening. When the system finally settles into an uneasy hum, Elena pushes deeper into the restored files, tracing numerical footprints that move like someone running through walls. The data hops across jurisdictions with unnatural precision, bypassing barriers only insiders should even know exist. Vale pretends to focus on another terminal, but she catches the way his shoulders tighten each time she uncovers another missing fragment. The gap between what he says and what he knows widens with every second, and she feels the pressure of a truth pressing from behind the code. The more she pieces together, the more she senses the architecture of a larger design, one that curves around them like an invisible trap. Patterns emerge, subtle but intentional, pointing toward a shadow network operating beneath legitimate markets, choreographed to move billions without leaving fingerprints. And someone wants her to see it. A new window loads, slowly, almost reluctantly, revealing an encrypted path threading through banks she once audited years ago. The nostalgia is bitter. She remembers believing in clean systems, in data that told the truth if you knew where to look. Now, every line feels tampered with, like someone has rewritten history in real time. Vale moves beside her, offering a comment meant to sound helpful, but she notes how carefully he avoids looking directly at the anomalies. The data pulses like a heartbeat from a body no one admits exists, and the deeper she goes, the more deliberate its pulse becomes. She feels a tug of recognition she can't explain, as if someone crafted these breadcrumbs specifically for her eyes. The screen jumps, then stabilizes into a global map speckled with active nodes, forming a pattern too intentional to ignore. Elena watches the points ignite one by one until they connect into a structure that resembles a web rather than a network. Vale's breathing changes behind her, barely noticeable but impossible to miss once heard. She asks if he's seen this configuration before, and his pause is confirmation disguised as silence. The nodes pulse with a steady rhythm, each blink marking money routed through invisible corridors. She realizes this isn't merely manipulation, it's orchestration, a design meant to shift power quietly, predictably, decisively, and whoever built it wants control, not chaos. A deeper layer unlocks unexpectedly, revealing transaction routes disguised as routine transfers, but looping through shell entities tied to offshore islands. Elena recognizes some of the account names. Old clients, old mistakes, old ghosts. The realization hits with steady weight. Someone resurrected defunct records to build this hidden engine. Vale finally speaks, offering a theory too rehearsed, too clean, and she hears the strain under his calm tone. She knows he's walking a narrow line, balancing between helping her and protecting something he hasn't admitted. The roots on screen swirl like a tide pulled by a moon she can't see, all moving toward a single convergence point that someone has gone to great lengths to hide. As she closes in on the convergence point, the system hesitates, then throws a warning she's never seen before, an alert requesting biometric authorization she no longer has access to. Someone has locked the final layer behind a clearance level far above anything she held even at her peak. Vale steps closer, and the room grows quieter, as if waiting for a choice neither of them is ready to make. She wonders whether he has the access needed, whether his presence here was coincidence or design, whether the strings tugging at this entire mess lead not into the shadows, but directly through him. The alert flashes again, insistent, urgent, and she feels the weight of the moment settle like a turning tide. If she opens the door, nothing stays hidden. The biometric alert keeps pulsing like a heartbeat trapped inside the machine, and Elena feels the pressure closing in as she weighs whether to cross a line she once swore she wouldn't touch. Vale says nothing, but the silence he carries feels heavier than any warning. She remembers the old protocols, how access wasn't merely permission but responsibility, how restricted layers existed to shield people from truths that could reshape entire economies. Now those walls feel less protective and more like barriers someone constructed to keep her out. She studies the alert again, sensing a familiar signature beneath the code, a whisper from someone who once trusted her with their life. The room hums faintly, waiting, while she wonders if breaking the seal will expose the puppeteer behind the global manipulation, or reveal a secret tied directly to her own past. She initiates a bypass she learned years ago, a trick whispered among auditors who needed to see what executives hid in shadows. The system resists, stalling at each forced step, as though someone anticipated her move and built traps in the pathways. Vale shifts beside her, his breathing shallow, and she senses the conflict building behind his calm facade. When the final barrier cracks open, the screen reveals a ledger unlike anything she's seen. Transactions forming a spiral rather than a network, looping with uncanny elegance. It's not chaos, it's choreography. Someone built this with precision, guiding financial flows to a central point she still can't see. The spiral feels intentional, like a fingerprint left by a mind that wanted her to understand the shape, not just the numbers. Elena zooms deeper, discovering names attached to the outer rings of the spiral. Some she recognizes from past investigations, others long erased from the public record. Each name is a doorway into a history she once escaped, threads leading back to a network she thought dissolved years ago. Vale steps closer, and this time she catches a flicker of recognition in his eyes as one particular name flashes across the screen. He masks it quickly, but not quickly enough. She demands to know what he's hiding, and his hesitation is the answer she feared. The answer she feared. The spiral wasn't merely constructed to move money. It was built to connect people across borders, industries, and governments. People who should never have had reason to cooperate. Someone stitched them together into a quiet empire. The deeper she dives, the clearer the pattern becomes. Each inner ring of the spiral traces transactions timed to geopolitical events, as though someone predicted crises before they happened, or caused them. Elena feels her stomach twist as she pieces together the implication. The puppeteer doesn't just move money, they move nations. Vale finally speaks, voice low and weary, hinting that some structures were never meant to be decoded by one person. She senses his loyalty, tearing in opposite directions, bound to secrets he never chose. But Elena refuses to step back now. The spiral narrows toward a center, still locked behind another encrypted layer. A core she's certain contains the identity of whoever built this financial web. If she can reach the heart, she can expose the strings. She attempts to breach the final layer, and the room shifts instantly. Lights dimming, screens flattening into a stark warning. A single message appears. Elena Ruiz is unauthorized. Report triggered. Her chest tightens as the building's ventilation slows, the hum of machinery pausing as though the entire structure is holding its breath. Vale's reaction is immediate. A step forward filled with urgency rather than threat. But she can't tell whether he's afraid for her or for what the system will reveal. The warning repeats, louder, colder, unmistakably personal. Someone watched her every move. Someone who knows her past, her patterns, her limits. And the message implies something she never expected. The puppeteer knew she was coming. The warning echoes through the dim room until Elena forces herself to breathe, steadying her hands as she studies the message repeating across every screen like a verdict. She feels the walls closing in, as if the entire building has turned into an observation chamber built for her alone. Vale insists they need to disconnect, but the fear threading through his words exposes how deeply he understands the consequences. She rewinds the last few seconds in her mind, realizing the system didn't just deny her access, it called her out by name, targeting her with the precision of someone who had mapped her entire digital footprint years ago. Panic wants to rise, but she crushes it beneath the weight of a single conclusion. Someone anticipated this moment. The puppeteer wasn't simply hiding. They were waiting. Vale powers down the nearest terminal, insisting the system's escalation protocol won't stop at security alerts. It will trigger countermeasures designed to erase evidence and isolate intruders. Elena hesitates, torn between retreating and pushing deeper, knowing she might lose the trail if she steps back now. She remembers how these architectures were built, how access logs were woven into trapdoors, meant to ensnare anyone digging too close to forbidden layers. But the spiral she saw wasn't speculation. It was a blueprint of influence spanning continents. She feels the weight of every unanswered question pressing against her lungs, and in Vale's strained stare, she senses a truth he can't speak without breaking something inside himself. To move forward, she'll need more than skill. She'll need the one thing she no longer trusts: him. Elena demands answers, and Vale finally breaks his silence. He admits the architecture she uncovered wasn't built by a single person, but by an internal alliance formed years before she left her auditing career. They believed the global system would eventually collapse under its own weight, so they shaped a network designed to redirect capital during crises, an invisible stabilizer, or so they claim. But over time, control shifted to one member who twisted the system into a private empire. Elena feels the sting of betrayal as Vale reveals her old mentor's name, the one connection she never questioned. She remembers long nights of analysis, lessons whispered like truths, guidance offered without strings. But the strings were always there, she just didn't see them. Memories rush in, files she reviewed, signatures she authenticated, decisions she trusted because they came from someone who shaped her early career. She feels the world tilt as she realizes the puppeteer didn't just anticipate her approach. They raised her to reach this point. Vale explains that her access keys, long expired, still exist deep within the system because her mentor ensured her credentials were never truly removed. She wasn't an outsider breaking in. She was a dormant part of the architecture waking up. The realization cracks something inside her. A fracture between who she thought she was and the role she unknowingly played. The spiral wasn't calling to her. It was expecting her. Elena steps back from the table, breath steadying as she realizes she can no longer run from the truth buried in the data. She was shaped to understand this system better than anyone. From its legal structures to its blind spots to the language it spoke when it wanted to hide, the mentor she trusted didn't just teach her. They groomed her to become the only person capable of unmasking the architecture if it ever turned against its creator. Vale warns that exposing the puppeteer will draw global retaliation, that those benefiting from the system will protect it at all costs. But Elena no longer hears fear in his voice, only resolve. She turns to the screen, knowing the spiral's center still waits behind that final encrypted layer. And this time, she won't hesitate. Elena reactivates the terminal with a steadiness she no longer needs to fake. Feeling the last pieces of her old life settle into place like a key, sliding into a long-forgotten lock. The spiral waits on screen, its pulsing rings narrowing toward the encrypted heart she's ready to confront. Vale stands close enough for her to sense his urgency, yet far enough that she knows the next move is hers alone. Well, she studies the code again, noticing faint patterns she once overlooked, markers her mentor used to leave in their training sessions, subtle nudges meant to guide her thinking. Now those marks feel like breadcrumbs from a past that refuses to release its grip. The room hums with low current as she builds the override sequence, each keystroke echoing like a countdown. She knows crossing this threshold will expose not just the puppet master, but every thread binding her to them. The system resists her override, flickering like a creature trying to shake off a hand that knows its weaknesses. Elena adjusts the algorithm, using sequences her mentor taught her to interpret hidden ledgers, techniques she once admired without understanding their purpose. Vale watches each line of code shift, his expression tightening as he realizes how deeply her past has been woven into this architecture. A second barrier rises, sharper, faster, almost defensive. But she doesn't hesitate. She attacks it with the confidence of someone who finally sees the shape of the maze. Her mentor wanted her to master these layers, but they never expected her to use them against the very system they built. The terminal groans under the strain, lights dimming in synchronized pulses, as if bracing for the truth waiting beneath. The final barrier snaps open with a jolt that cuts through the room, and the spiral collapses into a single ornate signature. An encrypted identity marker Elena recognizes instantly. Her mentor's insignia glows at the center, surrounded by dates, transactions, and hidden directives tying global events to deliberate manipulations. Her breath freezes as she reads through decisions she once believed were organic market shifts, now revealed as orchestrated steps in a long campaign of controlled instability. Vale murmurs a curse under his breath, realization cracking across his expression. Elena scrolls deeper, finding her own early audits embedded in the foundation as validation keys. She wasn't just a student, she was part of the blueprint. The truth is staggering. The puppeteer didn't merely train her. They built the system around her. Elena forces herself past the shock, diving into the archived messages embedded in the core. Each one carries her mentor's quiet cadence, calm, deliberate, coaxing her toward the truth they believed she would one day need. They describe a vision of global influence maintained through controlled volatility, a system built not to destroy markets, but to bend them. And nestled between the lines is a message addressed to her, instructions not for control, but for dismantling. Her mentor anticipated their own corruption, feared what the system might become, and left behind the tools she'd need to collapse the empire from within. Vale reads over her shoulder, stunned, realizing the puppeteer wasn't a tyrant. They were a creator who lost control. And now they're testing whether Elena can finish what they couldn't. She steps back from the console, feeling the magnitude of the moment settle like a shift in gravity. The path forward is clear. The spiral's collapse mechanism lies buried in the final directive, a single sequence capable of tearing the hidden network out by its roots. But triggering it will expose her to every power that has benefited from the architecture. Vale watches her closely, offering no arguments this time, only trust. She places her hand on the console, recalling the years she spent believing she had escaped this world, only to learn she was engineered for this exact choice. The directive glows softly, waiting for activation. Elena inhales, accepting that dismantling the puppeteer's creation may cost her everything. Then she reaches for the sequence, ready to pull the first string. Elena executes the first line of the collapse sequence, and the entire room responds like a living organism jolted from sleep. Lights flicker, terminals reawaken in cascading waves, and the spiral begins to unravel on screen, as if peeling back its own skin. Vale moves closer, bracing for the system's retaliation, but Elena keeps her hands steady, eyes locked on the shifting patterns. Every financial artery linked to the puppeteer's architecture pulses erratically, revealing choke points intentionally disguised as harmless redundancies. She sees the truth now. The collapse sequence was never meant to be clean. It requires precision, nerve, and a willingness to face whatever rises from the shadows once the empire starts to fall. The air thickens with digital static, a sign that she has stirred something powerful enough to fight back. As she advances to the next sequence, the architecture retaliates with misdirection, injecting false data, corrupting paths, and redirecting her commands through ghost servers meant to confuse untrained intruders. But Elena has spent years reading the subtle rhythms of financial deceit. She recognizes the puppeteer's signature in every misleading flicker. The system tries to overwhelm her, flooding the room with warnings, but she slices through each one with growing confidence. Vale sees the shift in her posture. The moment she stops fearing the network and starts mastering it, she realizes the puppeteer designed these defenses not to keep her out, but to test whether she was strong enough to finish what they began. The architecture buckles as Elena reaches the central node, the heart of the hidden empire. A single screen isolates itself from the others, displaying a live financial pulse so massive it feels like watching a continent breathe. Every major market connects here, tied through secret conduits her mentor designed to override global volatility. She feels the weight of her mentor's intention, the belief that only someone like her, with both the skill and conscience to wield power without succumbing to it, could access this point. Vale stands motionless, knowing that one wrong command could trigger worldwide fallout. Elena studies the pulse, recognizing its pattern. Not a heartbeat, but a countdown. The puppeteer knew this moment was inevitable. She enters the final sequence, and the pulse fractures into thousands of interwoven threads, each representing an institution unknowingly feeding the hidden network. The collapse must be precise. Too sharp and markets will crash. Too soft and the empire will survive. Vale murmurs a question about consequences, but Elena is already calculating them. She sees how the puppeteer managed crises, nudging global economies from chaos to stability without ever revealing their hand. Now she must undo decades of manipulation, without creating shockwaves that topple everything. Her mentor's final message echoes in her mind: balance the fall. She inhales deeply, preparing to cut the threads one by one. Elena executes the final command, and the room falls eerily silent. No alarms, no countermeasures, just an abrupt stillness. Then the screens begin shifting in slow, synchronized waves as the threads collapse inward, dissolving the puppeteer's empire without triggering a global shock. Markets stabilize on screen, adjusting themselves like a system returning to natural equilibrium after decades of artificial tension. Vale exhales in disbelief, the first flicker of hope breaking through his guarded state. Elena watches the collapse unfold with a mix of relief and grief, knowing the world will never know how close it came to being controlled by a single unseen mind. For the first time in years, she feels the architecture breathe freely. The strings have been cut, but the shadow of whoever built them still lingers. The aftermath settles over the room like dust after a controlled demolition. Quiet, gentle, almost tender compared to the storm they just endured. Elena watches the last threads dissolve into clean, transparent market feeds, a world returning to the rhythm it was meant to follow. But the victory feels incomplete, like a page torn from a book she's not finished reading. Vale studies her from the edge of the room, sensing that the collapse wasn't the end, but the exposure of a deeper void. Her mentor's absence presses on her chest, a reminder that the architect of the hidden empire may be gone, but their intentions still shape the edges of what remains. For the first time, she wonders whether removing the puppeteer has left the world safer or simply unguarded. As systems stabilize, archived files reappear. Messages left dormant for years, triggered only once the Empire was dismantled. Elena opens them cautiously, expecting instructions or warnings, but instead finds fragments of her mentor's final thoughts. They speak of regret not for building the system, but for losing control of it, for trusting the wrong people, for believing power could be shaped without reshaping the one who holds it. Elena feels an ache rise, realizing her mentor had seen their own corruption long before she did. Vale approaches slowly, offering a quiet presence rather than advice, letting her absorb the words at her own pace. The files fade into the background, leaving only the truth that the collapse wasn't revenge. It was mercy. Elena powers down the last terminal, and for the first time since the crisis began, the room goes still. No alarms, no flickers, just silence. She rises slowly, feeling the weight of the world shifting onto new foundations she helped restore. Vale asks what comes next, but she hesitates, unsure whether her role ends with dismantling the hidden empire or begins with preventing another from rising. She thinks of all the institutions unknowingly feeding the old system, the people who benefited without understanding the source. Power never disappears. It migrates, waits, finds new hands, and she knows some will try to rebuild what she destroyed. The only question is whether she will stand guard over the void or walk away from it forever. They exit the bunker into the early morning light, a city humming with normalcy, unaware of how close its stability came to unraveling. Cars roll past, shops open their doors, and markets tick upward on public screens with reassuring steadiness. Elena feels a strange mix of relief and isolation. Victories like this are invisible by design. Vale walks beside her, no longer guarding information but standing with the ease of someone who has chosen his side fully. She considers the possibility that her mentor wanted her to see this moment. A world free of invisible strings, even if only temporarily. She takes a breath of cool morning air, letting the weight of the night dray from her shoulders. As the city wakes, Elena stops at the edge of the street, watching people move with the comforting assumption that their world is steady. She realizes that exposing the hidden empire isn't just about tearing down structures. It's about ensuring no one else builds new ones in the dark. Vale asks where she'll go now, and she finally answers with clarity. She's going to follow the void the collapse left behind. Not to fill it, but to keep it from being filled by the wrong hands. The puppeteer's legacy won't end with their fall. It will echo in every corner of global finance unless someone stays vigilant. Elena turns away from the skyline, knowing her mentor created her for this very purpose. Not to be another architect, but a guardian. And she accepts it.